Welcome back to Things I Know Nothing About, where we dive deep into topics we're genuinely curious about, even if we start with more questions than answers. Today, we're tackling a story that has really captured the public's attention: the longevity guru Peter Attia, his recent professional fallout, and a much larger, more philosophical question about separating the work from the individual.
It's a fascinating and, frankly, quite uncomfortable subject. Alex, Peter Attia is a prominent figure in the longevity and health space, with his book Outlive being a bestseller and him having a significant platform. Then, suddenly, he's making headlines for a very different reason, and it's a stark reminder that even figures we admire for their intellect can have incredibly complex and problematic associations.
Absolutely. For those who might not be fully up to speed, Peter Attia, who authored Outlive and was briefly a CBS News contributor, resigned from CBS in February 2026. This came after a trove of emails between him and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein surfaced, revealing a relationship that many found deeply troubling, especially given Epstein's history.
And it wasn't just a fleeting acquaintance. From what the reports indicate, these weren't a couple of polite exchanges. The Justice Department's release of these previously undisclosed emails painted a picture of a chummy and personal relationship, with Attia's name appearing in hundreds, and some reports even say over 1,700 of the newly public files. This certainly wasn't a minor detail in his past.
The timeline is crucial here too. These communications primarily occurred in the mid-2010s, which is well after Epstein's 2008 guilty plea for prostitution charges involving a minor. This isn't a case of someone being unaware of Epstein's past. His conviction was public knowledge. The content of some of these emails has also been described as quite crude and revealing.
Indeed, Alex, one particularly notable exchange from 2016 involved Attia making a vulgar joke about female anatomy, stating, "P at Y is indeed low carb. Still awaiting results on gluten content, though." That sort of comment in any context is jarring, but especially when connected to someone like Epstein, it certainly raises eyebrows about judgment and character. It's hard to reconcile with the image of a serious health expert.
It certainly complicates things beyond that. Other emails reportedly showed Attia expressing concern about Epstein's outrageous lifestyle being a problem with becoming friends with you because he can't tell a soul. This suggests a recognition of the problematic nature of the association, even if he continued it. There were also reports of Attia asking Epstein for patient referrals, staying in his apartment, and even discussing a job opening at his new New York City medical practice for a head of patient experience, all after Epstein's conviction.
It really does paint a picture of a deeper, more intertwined relationship than some might initially assume. Attia himself stated he met Epstein on 7 or 8 occasions at his New York City home to discuss research studies and to meet others he introduced me to, and at times responded to general medical questions recommending other providers. He also clarified in his apology that he was not involved in any criminal activity and that his interactions had nothing to do with his sexual abuse or exploitation of anyone. He claims he was misled by Epstein regarding the severity of his 2008 charges.
That's a critical detail, the claim of being misled about the severity of the charges. It's a common defense among those who associated with Epstein, but it's difficult for many to accept given the public nature of Epstein's conviction. Attia did issue a lengthy apology on social media, acknowledging the emails as embarrassing, tasteless, and indefensible, and expressing regret for putting himself in such a position. Beyond CBS News, he also stepped down as chief science officer for a protein bar company, indicating significant professional consequences.
Regardless of the details of his awareness, the fallout was swift and significant. It forces us to confront this initial uncomfortable question. What do these revelations mean for his work, especially his hugely popular book, Outlive: The Science and Art of Longevity? Can we truly separate the science from the scientist? Or does this connection fundamentally alter how we should view his recommendations?
That's precisely the core of our discussion today, Maya. Let's start by looking at Outlive itself. Published in 2023, co-written with Bill Gifford, it's been widely reviewed and generally praised for its scientific rigor and extensive citations. Attia advocates for Medicine 3.0, a preventative approach focused on extending health span by delaying the onset of chronic diseases, what he calls the four horsemen: heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and metabolic dysfunction.
And that framework, the Four Horsemen, is really compelling. It makes a lot of sense intuitively to focus on these major drivers of morbidity and mortality. The book's strengths are definitely noteworthy. It's praised for grounding its claims in a wide range of scientific literature, boasting nearly 40 pages of references. That's a substantial amount of backing for his arguments, demonstrating a commitment to an evidence-based approach.
He strongly emphasizes what he considers the core pillars of longevity: exercise, nutrition, sleep, and emotional health. He often highlights exercise as the most potent longevity drug, which is a powerful statement, but one that many in the health community would agree with, given the overwhelming evidence for its benefits across various health markers. It's a foundational message that resonates with a lot of people.
I think his explanation of metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance is particularly lauded as a key underpinning for the Four Horsemen. He makes a very strong case for its critical importance, helping readers understand how these seemingly disparate conditions are often interconnected through metabolic health. This holistic view is something many reviewers commend him for, effectively illustrating the complex web of chronic conditions.
So, on the surface, the book appears to be a robust, well-researched guide to improving health span. However, like any comprehensive health approach, it has areas that warrant closer examination, and some critics have raised valid points of debate. It's important to apply our research framing guidelines here, looking beyond the surface and into the methodology and context of his recommendations.
Exactly. One area that frequently comes up is what some critics argue is an overemphasis on diagnostics. Attia advocates for extensive and advanced diagnostic testing, which can certainly provide a very detailed picture of an individual's health. But this approach sparks debates about cost effectiveness, accessibility, and the potential risks of overdiagnosis, which is a real concern in modern medicine, leading to unnecessary procedures or anxiety.
That's a crucial point, Maya. While more data can sometimes be better, we need to consider the clinical significance of every test. Is the information actionable, and does it lead to better outcomes compared to a more standard diagnostic approach? The Hippocratic Oath's do no harm principle becomes relevant here. Sometimes excessive testing can lead down paths that aren't necessarily beneficial or might even cause harm due to false positives or unnecessary interventions.
And let's not forget the financial aspect. Attia's own medical practice is described as a six-figure program, which immediately makes these extensive diagnostic protocols inaccessible to the vast majority of people. While he aims to provide actionable strategies, many of his recommendations, especially in diagnostics, are viewed as aspirational, requiring significant resources and time that may be impractical for the average individual.
It's a valid criticism. If the goal is public health and improving the health span for as many people as possible, then recommendations that are only feasible for the ultra-wealthy present a challenge. It inadvertently creates a two-tiered system where advanced longevity is a luxury good, rather than an achievable goal for the broader population, even if the underlying science is sound.
Another area of contention is his discussion on hormone replacement therapy, HRT. While HRT can be beneficial for specific indications, Attia's broader advocacy for it is considered controversial within some segments of the scientific and medical community. There's a lot of nuance, and the long-term risk-benefit profiles for certain applications, especially in healthy aging populations without clinical deficiencies, are still subjects of active research and debate. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Indeed, when we talk about hormone replacement, especially for anti-aging purposes rather than treating a diagnosed deficiency, we need to be very careful. The relative risks and absolute risks of various cancers, cardiovascular events, and other side effects need to be clearly communicated and compared against the baseline. Sometimes the enthusiasm for optimizing biomarkers can outpace the robust clinical trial evidence, showing a net benefit and safety over decades.
Absolutely. And it's not just HRT. Some specific recommendations regarding certain medications like rapamycin and certain cancer screening methods are also questioned. Critics suggest he might be getting ahead of his skis or that these recommendations lack strong supporting evidence from randomized clinical trials, relying more on observational studies or preclinical data, which, while valuable, aren't the gold standard for clinical recommendations.
That's a perfect example of where our research framing guidelines come into play. When a finding sounds too dramatic or a recommendation seems revolutionary, we need to dig into the methodology and sample size. Are we seeing statistically significant results that also translate to clinical significance? A p-value might be small, but if the effect size is tiny and the long-term safety isn't fully established, then prudence is warranted.
And it's not just the science itself, but how it's framed. Sometimes in the longevity space, there can be a tendency to cherry pick endpoints or present findings in a way that maximizes perceived benefits while downplaying potential risks or the limitations of the current evidence. It's crucial for consumers of this information to be discerning and not just accept claims at face value, even from a well-regarded expert.
So while Outlive is generally well regarded for its scientific foundation and comprehensive approach, it's fair to say that specific aspects of his advice warrant careful consideration and discussion with healthcare professionals. It's not an instruction manual to be followed blindly, but rather a robust framework that requires individual tailoring and critical evaluation, especially for interventions that are still subjects of ongoing scientific debate.
This brings us back to the elephant in the room. Alex, given these revelations about Peter Attia's association with Jeffrey Epstein, how does this impact our ability to trust or evaluate his scientific claims? Can you truly separate the science from the scientist, or does the personal conduct of an individual inevitably taint their professional output, especially when it comes to public health advice?
This is a deeply complex ethical and philosophical question, Maya, and there are compelling arguments on both sides. Let's start with the arguments for separation. One perspective suggests that science, by its very nature, is impersonal. The validity of scientific facts, hypotheses, and empirical data should, in theory, be independent of who made the discovery or championed the idea.
That makes a lot of sense conceptually. Gravity, for instance, remains gravity regardless of Isaac Newton's personal life or moral failings, if any. The scientific method emphasizes replicable, testable hypotheses and data analysis. Proponents of separation argue that the objective pursuit of knowledge should not be tainted by personal beliefs or actions, as long as the scientific methodology itself remains sound. A peer-reviewed study's results are what they are, regardless of the lead author's personal history.
And in some fields, particularly fundamental physics or mathematics, this separation might be easier to maintain. The equations work, the experiments yield results, and the data speaks for itself. The moral decoupling, as some research suggests, separating judgments about a person's morality from their work, is often perceived as easier for scientific work than for artistic or more subjective endeavors.
But then we have the arguments against complete separation. And this is where it gets really thorny, especially in fields like medicine and public health. There's a growing philosophical and empirical view that ethics are not merely external constraints on science, but are integral to good science itself. This perspective suggests that ethical scientific methodology requires attention to both epistemic, knowledge-related, and non-epistemic, ethical, social, moral values throughout the research process.
That's a powerful counterpoint. Scientists are, after all, human beings, complex beings inextricably intertwined with their own biases and cultural narratives. Their personal values, motivations, and even their financial interests can absolutely influence research questions, how data is interpreted, and the framing of findings. For example, Attia's high-cost practice, or even his past crude emails and association with Epstein, could raise questions about his judgment or the non-epistemic values that might consciously or unconsciously shape his medical advice.
It's not about whether the facts of biology change, but about the interpretation of those facts, the emphasis placed on certain interventions, and the trust we place in the messenger. If a scientist has demonstrated questionable judgment in their personal life, it's a natural human tendency to at least pause and wonder if that judgment extends to their professional recommendations, especially when those recommendations involve expensive or controversial interventions.
And this leads directly to the issue of public trust and professional consequences. The public's ability to trust scientific information can be severely eroded when scientists involved in misconduct or even just profoundly questionable associations retain their platforms without accountability. Attia's resignation from CBS and other roles isn't just a punishment, it's a response to societal expectations and an effort to maintain institutional credibility. Advocacy groups hailed his CBS exit as a wake-up call for accountability, highlighting how seriously this is taken.
It underscores that science isn't conducted in a vacuum. It exists within a societal context, and scientists are public figures whose conduct can impact the broader perception of science itself. When we talk about health advice, which directly impacts people's lives, the credibility of the source becomes paramount. If a scientist's ethical compass appears to be off, it inevitably casts a shadow over their advice, even if the underlying scientific principles they cite are technically sound.
There's also an important distinction to make between science as a methodology and scientism. Science is a rigorous, self-correcting process of inquiry. Scientism, on the other hand, is the dogmatic belief that science is the only source of truth, often leading individuals to present personal opinions or extrapolate beyond empirically testable hypotheses as scientific truth. When individuals, even scientists, blur these lines, it can make the scientist inseparable from the science in the public's perception.
That's a really insightful point, Alex. Attia is undeniably brilliant and has done a lot to popularize important health concepts. But when he moves from explaining established biology to advocating for specific, expensive, and sometimes controversial interventions, the line between scientist and guru can become blurred. At that point, his personal judgment, his financial interests, and his associations become much more relevant to how we evaluate his advice.
It's almost as if the more prescriptive and actionable the advice becomes, the more the personal character of the individual delivering it matters. If he were just explaining the Krebs cycle, perhaps his personal life would be less relevant, but when he's telling people what tests to get, what medications to consider, and how to restructure their entire lifestyle, it's a different ballgame altogether. He is asking for a significant degree of trust from his audience.
And that trust is precisely what's been impacted. While the underlying scientific facts and principles Attia presents in Outlive can and should be evaluated on their own merits, the broader context of his public persona, his ethical conduct, and his associations undeniably impacts how his work is received and the trust placed in his interpretations and recommendations. It's a holistic consideration, not just a compartmentalized one.
So, to bring it back to our initial question, can you separate the science from the scientist? The answer seems to be nuanced. In a purely theoretical sense, yes, the laws of physics or biology stand independent of the discoverer, but in the practical application of science, especially in public-facing roles like a health guru or a media contributor, the scientist's character, judgment, and perceived trustworthiness become inextricably linked to the reception and credibility of their scientific claims.
It's a powerful lesson for all of us, both as consumers of information and perhaps even as those who aspire to share knowledge. Transparency, accountability, and a holistic consideration of both the scientific claims and the individuals who champion them are absolutely critical. It's not enough to just cite studies. One must also embody a certain level of integrity and judgment, especially when guiding people's health decisions.
And it's a reminder that even when we admire someone's intellect or their contributions to a field, we must maintain a critical perspective. We have to steelman the arguments, look for potential biases, and always ask, what are the limitations, what are the conflicts of interest, and how does the messenger's conduct impact the message? It's a constant process of evaluation.
This conversation highlights that the pursuit of longevity and health is not just about biochemistry and exercise protocols, it's also deeply human, involving trust, ethics, and the complex interplay between personal conduct and professional impact. The Attia-Epstein connection isn't just a scandal, it's a case study in the broader ethical considerations of science in the public sphere.
Indeed, it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths and to refine our understanding of what it means to be a credible source of information. It's a challenging but necessary discussion, and one that I think will continue to evolve as more stories like this emerge.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you for diving into this complex topic with me today. It's definitely given me a lot to think about regarding how I approach health information and the people who deliver it.
My pleasure, Maya, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on Things I Know Nothing About. We hope this discussion has given you some valuable insights and prompted some critical thinking of your own. We'll be back next time with another topic we know nothing about yet.